Chapter 9. From Birmingham to Washington. 1963 began badly for the SCLC and Martin Luther King. He had had success in Montgomery and Greensboro, but now, for the first time, he failed. The SCLC tried to end segregation in Albany, Georgia. They fought against the town government and the police for almost a year. But at the end of the year, Albany's schools, libraries, and parks were still segregated. King had lost in Albany. Now he needed to win somewhere. He started to think about Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was one of the worst cities in the country for black people. It was sometimes called Bombingham because there had been so many bomb attacks on houses and churches in black neighborhoods. There had been 18 of these attacks in the last 6 years, but no one was ever arrested for them. The chief of the Birmingham police was a man called Bull Connor. When the SCLC organized protests in Birmingham, Connor's policemen beat the protesters and attacked them with dogs. Hundreds of protesters were hurt, and hundreds were arrested. King was one of the protesters who went to prison. When he was in prison, King read that some white church leaders had called for an end to the protests. They said it was not the right time for protests. King was angry when he read this. He wrote a letter to the white churchmen. In it, he said, "You say it's not the right time to protest. You say wait. For years I've heard the word wait. For too many years, black people have waited. Too often. Wait means never." There was a problem with the protest. When men and women were arrested and put in prison, they often lost their jobs. It was difficult for black families when their fathers and mothers were in prison. "Why not ask young people to join the protest?" King said. Plenty of school children wanted to join the protesters in Birmingham because they wanted to help. Freedom was as important to them as it was to their parents. Some black leaders were worried about this plan. "These young children will get hurt when the police attack," they said. But King's reply was, "Segregation will hurt them even more." On the 2nd of May, 1963, 50 children aged from 6 to 18 marched to the center of Birmingham. They were arrested and put into prison. Then another 50 did the same. They were also arrested and put in prison. Then another 50, then another. By the end of the day, 1,000 children were in prison. Birmingham's prisons were full. At first, the police were too surprised to do anything, but next day they came with police dogs and powerful water hoses. Men, women, and children were knocked down by the power of the water and attacked by the dogs. When the protests were shown on television, the violence of the Birmingham police shocked many Americans. Black people were attacked by police just because they wanted the same rights as white people. People all over the country knew that this was not right. They knew that things had to change. And people in other countries were shocked too. How was this possible in a country like the United States of America, the land of the free? People began to ask questions about freedom in America. Was it only for white Americans? What about black Americans? Birmingham agreed to stop segregation in its schools and on its buses. King had won the battle. Later in the year, he had his finest moment. In the summer of 1963, President Kennedy tried to get a new civil rights law. Civil rights leaders organized the biggest protest march of all to support the president. They wanted people from all over the country to go to Washington, D.C., and ask for equal rights for Black Americans. On the 28th of August, 1963, more than 250,000 people came to Washington and marched to the Lincoln Memorial. There were speeches and songs. Finally, Martin Luther King stood up and made the greatest speech of his life. "I have a dream," he said. In the America of his dream, blacks and whites were equal and lived together in peace. The speech was shown on television all over the world. People cried when they heard King's words. Surely things must change now, they thought. The country was full of hope for the future. But later in that year, 1963, America was once again shocked by terrible violence.